So first of all, what is domain services for Windows? And really, it's a group or a suite of technologies working together that will provide an AD-style authentication. It will allow your users and applications to authenticate into eDirectory via this domain, DSFW domain, and with an AD-style authentication. So with this, users can access, eDirectory users can access resources on an AD domain, and applications can, users can access AD applications, or applications that only work with an AD domain. It also allows access for going in, access. So not only accessing, an AD domain, but also your existing eDirectory infrastructure. So if you have, your some NetWare servers or OES servers or SLES servers that you have resources running in that environment, you can also access resources there. So it's not strictly just within the domain. So a little demonstration of DSFW, kind of graphical idea. So in this case, we have an eDirectory tree. We have an O and a couple of OUs, and we have some Novell servers there. And over on another site, we have an Active Directory tree. So what we could do with DSFW is set up a domain here, set up a child domain at this location, or and a child domain at this location. And with SP3, if we want, we could just make this one big domain. It's up to you. But in this scenario, we're setting up 3 domains. So that would require a DSFW server at each location there, there, and there. So we have our domain all our domains all set up. What does that give us? What functions? Specifically, user management. When say on this side, you have a user that's used to using, or an administrator that's used to using iManager or Console One, or the Novell tools for administering users. It can continue to do that on this side through this domain. On the flip side, say you have an AD administrator or a person that's more familiar with AD, he can use MMC if he would like. Also, Windows servers. Say you have some Windows servers that you need to access some files on, you can make them members of a DSFW domain, and those users your eDirectory users can access the files on the member servers. Another option is clientless authentication. If you need clientless authentication for some reason, you don't want the Novell client, DSFW is also an option. However, I would still suggest using Novell SIFs. That's a better way to go, in my opinion. It's just less intrusive, but DSFW is an option. Now, say you have an eDirectory user that goes across over to this other site that's running Active Directory. So he's a mobile user here. Generally, you'll have to have either IDM set up to synchronize the accounts, or you're going to need an account over on the AD side and on the eDirectory side. Well, with DSFW, you could have the user just in the eDirectory side, and when he comes over here, he could log into the DSFW domain and access the resources in this AD forest via a cross-forest truss. So that's one possibility of using the truss. Another thing that comes up is applications, giving AD-style applications. You can have those applications go directly against the DSFW domain. However, sometimes, depending on the application, it might not work quite right with DSFW. Some custom applications I've come across that aren't really properly engineered have some problems with can have some problems with DSFW. Also, supportability. You might have an application, and if you tell them, yeah, I'm running it against DSFW, like, what are you talking about? So that might not be an option. So if that's the case, you can have the application configured against an AD domain and access this application, again, by this cross-forest trust. And this is probably the #1 reason why I see DSFW implemented, is that they have an AD application that needs needs AD authentication, and usually they'll also have an Active Directory domain. Sometimes they set up an Active Directory domain specifically for this application. Sometimes they can just have the application work directly against DSFW. That's the primary reason why DSFW is implemented. So get into a brief overview of AD. So we have a domain in AD, and a domain is really just a security boundary. Now that security boundary, or that domain, is equal to a partition in eDirectory, and also with DSFW. So in the first versions of eDirect or of DSFW, a domain was set up on one partition, and it could only a partition equal the domain. With SP2, OS2 SP3, that allowed multiple partitions within a domain. So that restriction isn't for one domain, one partition is no longer in effect. You can have multiple partitions inside a domain, but still that gives you an idea of how it's the security boundary is set up. Also in AD, you have a forest. A forest contains all of your domains, and that forest represents in eDirectory the tree. Now, just a note, AD also has trees within their forest. At this time, DSFW does not support that. Let me go back one. That would be, in essence, like a different tree would be like Novell.com and SUSE.com. The domain names are completely different. Those would be two separate trees. At this time, that is not supported within DSFW, but something that down the road that might be. Also, in the domains, you have your shared secrets or your transitive trust between your domains. So that's how they trust each other as user accessing resources between domains. Same thing with DSFW. The native security model is based off of shared secrets. So what you have with a domain controller, it contains all of your users' keys. That allows for authentication. That's what makes a domain controller an authentication server. The same thing in DSFW. Your domain controller retains all the users' keys. The authentication, it supports the challenge response, which is the NTLM and digest, or the Needham-Schroeder or Kerberos authentication. So your users and groups, they're identified in AD with a SID. It's your security ID. And that security ID is broken up into two pieces. You have a domain-specific prefix. It's randomly generated at the time the domain is created. And then you have a RID, or relative ID, or the integer suffix that's attached to it. Those two pieces together make up your SID, or your security ID. Same thing in DSFW. Member servers. In AD, you have member servers. They're non-domain controllers. Authentication does not happen on those servers. Those are usually for resources, like an application or a file server. Same thing in DSFW. So our domain controllers, they are the authentication servers. Now, a lot of people still call it in NAD your PDC or primary domain controller. Really, that's an NT term. The AD term is FSMO, or flexible single master operator. In AD, you have multiple roles that a domain controller can do, and you can split those roles up amongst many domain controllers or have them just running on one domain controller. And it's the same thing in DSFW. You have the same roles, like the RID master is a role, infrastructure master, schema master. Schema master is more of a tree-wide instead of a domain-specific role, but still, those roles that you have in AD, you have with DSFW, and you can use the same tools to transfer those roles to other domain controllers. Now, something that we call in DSFW a non-FSMO domain controller is, we call it an ADC, or additional domain controller. Some people, again, the NT term was a BDC, or backup domain controller. It's just an additional domain controller. It can also handle authentication and really do everything that the FSMO server does, except it doesn't have, of course, the roles. Something else with AD, you have GPOs, or your group policy objects, which handle password policies, and you can lock down workstations and control the workstation environment. The GPOs work the same way within DSFW. Also, another term in AD is your global catalog. Now, LDAP is a little different than eDirectory. LDAP is generally, with searching within a domain. In this case, you have a global catalog which searches your entire tree. DSFW supports both of those, just domain searches, a global catalog which searches the entire, or I should say forest, the AD forest. DSFW also supports that. We'll get into features in DSFW. So features, we have the basically AD protocol support. If you need AD authentication, then this is what DSFW does. Emulation, domain emulation. Right now it's a 2000 Active Directory domain. They're working on support for 2008 schema. So you can run 2003 style domain on a 2008 server, and DSFW, if you're making a trust, you can make a trust to a 2003 domain on a 2008 server, 2008 R2 if you need to. But anyway, that's domain emulation. Manageability, you can use MMC or iManager, it's up to you. The authentication supports multiple protocols. So if you want to continue to use NCP, you can do that. It's all built on eDirectory, so that still is there. The LDAP, TLS, SSL, and you have, again, Kerberos and the NTLM and Digest. So member servers, it supports both the 2003 and 2008, and also the R2. This 2008 was added with the SP3. So again, we want to be on the latest to have full support. The Sis File replication. This is something that came about with, let me just turn this off here. It's popping up. So go back one there. There we go. So Sis File replication. When you authenticate into a domain, it reads the Sis File. Now, the first implementation of DSFW just had the Sis File on the primary or the FSMO domain controller. And now, starting in SP2 and also in SP3, that Sis File is replicated to the other domain controllers and allows for those to provide the full authentication into into the domain. And password policies, something with DSFW you can do, you can retain your password policies, your existing ones in eDirectory, or you can use the password policies in the GPO. So if you want to administer the password policies that way, that's also an option. And the final, it's upgradable, go from 2 to 3, or SP1 to SP2 to SP2 to SP3, and then eventually also to OES 11, which is coming out here shortly.
Rance?
Yes.
Sorry, we do have a question here.
Yeah.
From Rick. He said, I have just one eDirectory tree, and all he wants to do is present eDirectory as an AD for specific application needs. Will it do that?
For that one eDirectory tree, yes.
Okay.
So I'll go over the install shortly here. In the different install scenarios, there's 2 install scenarios, a brand new tree and an existing tree. And you can set up your domain and multiple domains if you need to in an existing tree. And if you just have anyway, is it specific, just a single server, or it's just demonstration, or what?
I am not sure. I'll try and get a little bit more information from him, and then we can go into
Okay.
that in the question and answer.
Yeah, I'll get to that section here about the installs here. Maybe I'll answer some questions.
Okay.
So again, some more features is YAST. So the install first was it's kind of brutal. The very first version, OS 2 SP1, and that if you had a problem, that it's pretty much we're starting over. Now the install is broken up into 2 pieces. You have the YAST and you have the provision wizard. And the provision wizard allows you to, if you run into a problem, to correct that and then to continue on. So the installs are much easier and smoother. And with that provisioning wizard, you're allowed to, you can script your entire install. So you can use auto YAST to install the first part of the server and get the components installed out there, and then write scripts to run the provisioning wizard, or run it manually if you want afterwards. This also, and gives the opportunity to fix any issues that come along the way. And this is an example right here of the provisioning wizard. Say if you run into an issue, get an error, it just gives you an X and gives you an opportunity to rerun it. So if you're like, oh man, another server it's trying to contact is down, let me check on that, let me get it up. Oh, there's something in this, a specific piece that you can fix it. If something times out, you can rerun it again and continue. So now we're going to talk about preparing for an install and the types of installs here. This is, first of all, the prerequisites for a successful deployment. So when you're using DSFW, first you've got to ask yourself a few questions. First one is, what am I going to use DSFW for? What is my plan? Again, the number one reason is application support. If you're doing application support, you need to ask yourself, will this work directly against DSFW, or do I need an AD domain for it to work properly, or to get support for my application? Do I need to have it go through a trust and an AD domain? Another question is, am I looking for clientless authentication? If you are, maybe the Novell Sifs is a better fit for you, because DSFW does change some things with schema, and it's a little more intrusive than Novell Sifs. Then another question, resource access. Is there already an AD domain or Microsoft servers that you need to access? Say, access files off of, or again, an application, but specifically, generally files. What do I need to access? And another option is you just want to have one single repository for all your users. Instead of using like IDM to synchronize to multiple directories, Say you have an AD driver set up, you can just have all your users inside eDirectory and inside your DSFW domain, and they can access your AD domain. So, and that's a common one that I've seen people where they have an AD domain, they need to create another AD domain. They're actually paying per user. That's their license agreement that's set up in. They already have eDirectory. They can just have their users in eDirectory go in and access the AD domain and thus save them money, or just move all their AD users inside of eDirectory and DSFW. So another question here is something to think about is installing. Are you installing to an existing tree, or you're going to set up a brand new one? If you're doing an existing tree, you need to have at least one 8.8 server, 8.8.2 or higher, with a replica of root in the tree. And it's best if you put at least one OS2 Linux server in the tree if you have a straight NetWare. Time synchronization, very important between workstations and the server. It's through Kerberos, the authentication, and Kerberos is time sensitive, extremely time sensitive. The default setting is within 5 minutes, but sometimes it can be even pickier than that. Another one, examine your existing eDirectory structure. So if you have a real flat tree, say you have underneath your O, you have just all your OUs, or I've even seen just all O's right underneath the root of the tree. You're going to need to look at restructuring your tree to work with DSFW. And DSFW, this is a big one here. It has to be installed on a brand new server. If the server already has eDirectory on it, that will not work, because the configuration depends on configuring eDirectory at the same time as DSFW. There's some, if eDirectory is on there already, it cannot be configured in a way to allow DSFW or the XAD piece of it, which is the DSFW essential part of it, to work properly. So it has to be a brand new server, brand new eDirectory. So your current eDirectory structure, you want to look at your domain name. What are you going to name your domain? A lot of people just don't even think about that. They just kind of get to that page and, oh, gee, what should I name it? Something to consider is don't use a .local. I know Microsoft suggests if you have an internal domain to use a .local. The problem is there's a RFC for DNS that it doesn't do a proper DNS query with a .local. I do have a TID that if you have a .local, kind of a workaround for DNS that allows it to make a true DNS query for a .local name. So, but again, don't use a .local. Use like a .internal or .int or something like that if you have an internal domain that you're setting up. Schema, you might need there are some issues where we've had some schema, and there's a TID on this. You can check schema in your tree if you might have users showing up or unable to administer users and groups with MMC. It's a problem with really MMC, and it's not completely RFC compliant. So that's something to consider. Partitions and replication. Think about you need to have good synchronization. Again, it's all built on eDirectory, so just general eDirectory health in your tree needs to be good. And also, before you do it, go over the documentation, and at the very least, if you go over this TID, this will give you a real quick snapshot, step-by-step, of what you need to check to have a successful install. Some of the stuff isn't isn't necessary to do, but if you do it, you're going to have a easy install. So our deployment options, we've got 2 deployment options. First is a new tree. It's called a non-name mapped. An existing tree is called a name mapped because you're mapping to a container. And just some characteristics to think about if you're doing a brand new tree is that the structure of it. First of all, it creates DC objects instead of O's and OU's, and it will create a DC equals com, and underneath that it will create a DC equals Novell, or basically whatever you name it. So if you had Novell.net, DC net and DC Novell. So that would be the structure. It would also, there is not an admin user created. I think actually that's on my next slide, but what is created is an administrator user. And that administrator user is given rights to the root of tree. So it's just like the admin, but it's administrator. So why would you use this? Obviously, you don't have a tree. You're just setting up a brand new tree, or you just want a single server tree. This is generally what it's used for. You don't see a lot of, I don't see a lot of these, but it is a possibility. So, and again, the difference, the administrator in D Sfw, he is the admin, where in there is no admin created. And again, where it's mapped, so again, if we created a domain called novell.com, it would be mapped to this container at the time of the install, and these 2 containers would be created. So if the other install is into an existing tree, and it's called a name mapped install. And the characteristics, obviously, you've got a tree, and it's partitioned off. The domain has to be installed at a partitioned container. So if you have an O, or even a DC or OU that you want to install domain DSFW at, you need to make sure that it's partitioned. The eDirectory tree, the admin is different from administrator, and that admin is given tree rights. His rights start at the tree. Administrator is not given supervisory rights at the tree. It starts at the container where you installed DSFW. So again, the rights are eDirectory rights, so they flow down from that level, and he's given supervisory rights from that level on down. And if you want to make it a supervisory tree, you can, of course, go and do that. The domain mapping to eDirectory, it's all managed by eDirectory. The admin is the one that manages the entire mapping of the domain to the tree. So you need to have a user that has supervisory rights to the tree and to that container when you do the install. So, why would you use this? Now, obviously, you have an existing tree and you want to create a domain there. That's the biggest one of all. Then you want to set up, you want to get rid of the Novell client. You want clientless authentication. So that's why you would, install into an existing tree. Again, if you're thinking of that, I would look at Novell Sifs first. And to allow existing eDirectory users access through AD style trust to Microsoft applications. We've already kind of talked about a lot of these. And also to preserve your existing eDirectory structure within applications and such. So if you have, GroupWise and Zen and everything set up, that can continue to function the way it is. If you had just specific users, and this is a scenario I see quite a bit, you have specific users that just need AD authentication for an application. You set up a domain specifically for those users, and everybody else, they have no idea that it even exists in the tree. So we'll do a demonstration and of a deployment. First part, I'll just do screenshots to kind of take you through the install part, because it does take a little longer than I was planning on to do the last part. It could take 10-15 minutes, and we don't want to have you sit and wait. So in this, we have an existing OS2 SP3 tree. This is a name mapped install, so an existing tree. We have this OS2 SP3 server. It's been partially configured, and basically it's gone through the YAST piece. I have screenshots of showing everything, and we just need to go through the provisioning wizard. And I've just kind of skipped through that part just to save some time. And we'll join a workstation to the domain and show how you can access resources. So when you do the install, it's a standard, when YAST selecting your OS services, you select DSFW or domain services for Windows, it will automatically select the other applications that are needed. Do not remove anything like Novell DNS. It has to be installed at this time. AD is extremely dependent on DNS, and so is DSFW. The screens very similar, like setting up a eDirectory tree. Again, you could come in here, decide the existing tree, new tree, basically the same screens going through and setting this up. And then this is where we get to the DSFW specific information. So you got different options: the new tree, new domain with a new forest, or just a plain new domain, or a new domain controller into an existing domain. So those are your three options, and just go in and set it up here. As you can see, this is grayed out. This is read off of your host file. So this one of the prerequisites, and it's like in the TID and the documentation also, is to have your host file set up correctly with the DNS name that you want to use. And again, just more, the administrator shows you where that's at. Just like in AD, you have a CN equals users container, and that's where your administrator is placed. Same thing with DSFW. Just give the option of giving it a specific password. And then here is when you're doing an existing tree install, a name mapped install, you have the option of where you want it mapped at. In this case, I mapped it to the O equals Novell container. Again, that container has to be partitioned, otherwise it'll give you a warning here. If you have a Novell KDC, you can migrate that information into DSFW, gives you that option. And then this also is a big one right here: retain existing password policies. If you have password policies in your tree and you want to keep using those, definitely check this. If you are planning on doing that, go set up your password policies and then come check this box. Otherwise, it will be using GPOs. And just a little warning message, just letting you know where it will be, where it's going to be mapped, and also that you are using existing password policy. So I have seen several people that check this but don't have a password policy, and then we have to just go through and do some additional configuration in order to make it work. There's little tweaks here, but just gives you warning messages about that. And then you have, with OS2 SP3, the common proxy user you can use, and the DNS configuration, and your summary screen, and you're on your way. And then it gives you, when you're done, it will give you this message saying that the provisioning wizard needs to be run. So this is the first half of the install. The second half is through the provisioning wizard. And the provisioning wizard, it will come up automatically if you reboot the server and it has not been completed. This would be basically gives you have to do the administrator and admin, and then this is something new with SP3, is this enable custom provisioning. And what that is allowing you to add other partitions to your domain. And you can do this, you don't have to do this at the time of install, you can do it later, but you can also do it at the time of install. One note is that you'll have to add a replica of these partitions. So it'll automatically show the partitions, and you can say, okay, which ones do I want to add? If you will have to add a replica of these partitions onto the server before checking the box. It's not that intuitive, but it does give you a message if you don't have it, just saying that you need to add or rewrite replica onto of that partition onto the server. You don't have to do that for where it's being mapped to. It will do that automatically. It's just additional partitions. And this is what it looks like, the provisioning wizard. When you go through, finish running it, you can select run all, just cruise right through, and then again, if you had a problem at some specific area, then you can rerun it. One of them is creating the configuration partition. Sometimes it doesn't complete that process, and it times out. It's doing it, but it doesn't complete it in a fast enough time for the provisioning wizard, and it's like, okay, I'm tired of waiting for you, and then it will stop. And if you just rerun it again, it'll be finished up, and it's fine. So it's going and creating partitions, and depending on how many servers you have with a replica, it can take a little longer. So sometimes that's why it will fail. But that is pretty much it, and I'll go on to a demonstration here of it. It is, I've got a VM up. So this is a DSFW server, and this right here is just a SLES server running eDirectory. And what I'll do is join this workstation to the domain. And so first, just log into your workstation. You can use command line, or you can do it the kind of easy, lazy man's way of going through and adding it. Now, something you need to make sure that this is pointing to, for DNS resolution, is just pointing to the DSFW server. So our domain is dsfw.novell.com, and it prompts you. Again, if you don't get that prompt, it'll give you an error. It's pretty good, letting you know that it can't resolve the name. Like, that means your DNS is on this server, or this workstation is not pointing to the DNS on the DSFW server. And DNS is something that after the install, you can go and modify, and if you want to, basically it's DNS. If you can do different configurations with DNS, and if you know about DNS, you can move DNS off of it. You can add it to an existing zone that you have, or there's all sorts of configurations. You can set up forwarders, whatever you want to do with DNS. So here we are. We're joined to the domain. We just have to restart, log back in, and while that is logging in or rebooting, I'll just go over to the DSFW server and pull up a terminal. Let me see if I can make the controls. There it goes. So one of the commands to make sure everything is up is xadcntrl status, or you can also do validate. So this goes through and shows you eDirectory piece right here, showing the eDirectory is up. Here's your tree. Here's bind information, and shows that it's running. And then it just goes through all the different services. So in the beginning I talked about how it's a suite of services. or technologies working together. You can see them all right here. Kerberos, the actual DSFW daemon, Novell, or the Samba, rsync, and SSHD. That's for the Sis File sync. Those are all the pieces of it. One thing we can do is get our Kerberos ticket. If you get a ticket, it comes back just like that. And do a WB info-n administrator. So I talked about before your SID. So this is your SID, or your overall SID, and the domain specific prefix is this first part right here, and then your relative ID or RID is this piece right here. So 500. Administrator is always 500 by default. So we can do the same thing for admin, and we can see his RID is different. Now let's take a look at our Windows Workstation, and I have it. I was patching my my Windows 7 VM. It was taking so dang long that I gave up on it. So let's do it on the XP box. So you can log in, multiple ways. Use this, or I can't think of the correct terminology, but you can do your domain name at dsfw.novell.com. Either way should work just fine. So as long as time is in sync, you should be able to log in. And it will automatically create a profile for you, whatever your setting is in your GPO. It's assigned for that user or that container. And we've got our administrative tools here. So like our users and computers, you can bring that up. I'll show you real quick that how you can, maybe if it comes up, how you can manage users with MMC. And so again, this is all eDirectory in the background of it. They're all eDirectory users. They're just, with DSFW allows it to communicate access by AD. So here's our domain. Here's our users. So we can go through and take a quick look at one of them here. It's kind of slow. Again, same, just exactly like in AD. So as far as you're administering your users, we're getting kind of low on time here. Are there any questions or anything? I know we had a question about the installs before. Is there anything else or anything in particular you'd like to see?
We have had a few questions.
Okay.
Let's see. What is the overhead with replication traffic? Are you now replicating with both AD and NDS traffic at the same time?
It's all eDirectory traffic. So just think of this as, again, this bunch of services running on top of, basically it's all based on eDirectory. So eDirectory, all the replication, all the benefits that you have of eDirectory are happening in the background. This is just running in front of it, and that just allowing access to eDirectory. So the eDirectory replication is exactly the same. There are some additional LDAP queries that it's doing that can put more of a load on the server or on your network if the server does not have a replica of the partitions that if it's looking further down the tree and it doesn't have those objects, it can take up more resources on it. But otherwise, it's just like eDirectory. The replication is all the same. So does that answer the question? Or